Hello, my name is Jeremy Barnes, and today I'm going to do a review for The Last of Us Season 2, the second season of HBO's series adapting The Last of Us video games from Naughty Dog and PlayStation. So, I will give kind of like a general review. As somebody who's played both games, I'm going to be coming at it from that perspective. And kind of doing a lot of comparisons because the games are something that I feel like very passionate about. So the way that it's adapted is kind of how I'm looking at it instead of maybe just as its own thing. But the first thing that I'll say, my overall thoughts about season two, is that it is a far cry from the quality of season one, and in my opinion, a terrible adaptation of the source material of part two. That waters down the violence not only from the game that it's adapting, but also um, watered down from season one, which actually had a lot harder hitting violence, in my opinion. And I would say that season two also makes unnecessary changes that become out of character for even some of the characters that we did meet in season one. But even like some character changes from the way that they're portrayed in the story of part two versus here in season two of the show. Um, but obviously, the biggest thing is the show itself, how the characters from season one to season two, it is very different, which is kind of weird to me. Um, I feel like overall, season two seems unsure of what it wants to do and the way it wants to present some of these characters and aspects of the story from part two, the source material. Um, I feel like it doesn't really commit to telling the story in any particular way, and it kind of feels like they're doing two things at the same time that are conflicting with one another. Um, and just something off the bat, this season is only 7 episodes, whereas season one was nine. And to me, that just doesn't make sense for it to be like that, especially because season two is adapting part two, the video game, which was more than double the length of the first video game. So we should have gotten more, not less, in season two. And if they were gonna make part two, the game, into multiple seasons of the show, they should have front loaded it where season two was more, and then depending on how much more story they had of the game to tell, then they could have made season three a little bit shorter and however long they plan on going, because they said it might not even just be 2 seasons but 3 seasons for part two, which in my opinion is like unnecessary as well. I think you could easily adapt part two the game into 2 seasons, which I think makes sense to break it up. Otherwise it would just be like a really long season, which is fine, but with the type of budget that HBO is working with and the like length of each episode, um, it does make sense to split it at least into two. Um, Now, I don't want to be completely negative about it because, especially the first time watching through season two, I did enjoy myself overall. And the good parts of season two definitely soar. They are really good. But the problem is that there's only really two parts that like really match the quality of season one, and that's like, a huge drop, and you know, but no show wants that. So in that sense, they did kind of fail, I think, going from season one into season two. Um, and then I'll just give you a score right away out of 10, um, just so you know kind of how I feel, and then I'll tell you why. So I would give season two of the show 7 out of 10. And the first section I'm going to talk about, still no spoilers, is the story. And I would say that the story is unsure of what it, if it wants to be a revenge tale or primarily a romance between Ellie and the new character of Dina, who actually kind of steals the show this season. And that was never a problem in the game. So that's kind of why I think the game was just a lot cleaner in its execution than the show was. The show kind of seems to really focus on that romance, whereas the game, it was definitely part of it, but it was more so kind of like the light and the darkness that is The Last of Us Part 2. And I'll go into that a little bit more when I get to the themes. But for now, I'm going to talk about the characters, beginning with Ellie, played by Bella Ramsey, because Ellie does take the lead as the primary protagonist this season, where it was kind of a co-protagonist situation in season one with her and Pedro Pascal's Joel Miller. Ellie this season is oddly portrayed as being kind of stupid, and she's supposed to be 5 years older than she was at the end of the first season. Um, but to me, like, that's not how teenagers really work. They don't get more stupid. They might be like kind of cocky, but they really kind of portrayed Ellie as being stupid, and she was never portrayed that way in season one. So that she's one of the characters, well, the primary character that I was talking about, of like the character doesn't seem like the same character, and like they kind of uh, mischaracterize Ellie even from her portrayal in season one. Another big part of the show this season was that they watered down her violence. Similarly, also from her violence in season one, where she was capable of doing some pretty violent things, and she was like kind of drawn to violence in an interesting way in season one. Here, she doesn't go nearly as hard, in my opinion, as she did in the first season, and especially as she did in the video game version of the story. Um, and they set that up very well, actually, like to make her really be that violent in season two. In that first season, like they laid everything out, so it's weird that they didn't really follow through with that in season two. Um, the next character who, like I said, stole the show and is kind of the new co-protagonist this season is Dina, played by Isabela Merced, and she's a lovable, intelligent sweetheart who's best friends with Ellie and can also get gritty when needed. And she was a great addition to the show, and I'm excited and hopeful that we will see more of her in season three and beyond if they make it that far. And then Jesse is the third kind of part of their trio in Jackson. He's played by young Mazino, and he's a fellow cohort of the Jackson community who, like I said, is in Ellie's friend group. And he ends up assisting her on her journey to Seattle as she takes on the Washington Liberation Front in season two, who, different from season one, actually are like the primary antagonists, whereas season one it was just this journey and there's just different things in the way. Here there's like actual antagonists in the story. And then now Joel, the previous co-protagonist from season one, played by Pedro Pascal, is similarly to Ellie, is kind of portrayed differently this season, where he to me seems a lot softer and kind of more relaxed than he was in season one, where he was a little bit more uptight and like untrusting of anybody other than the people that he already knew. Um, I would say this season, episode six, is the episode where Joel, and actually the season in general, shines the most. Um, there's another character that is kind of involved with Joel that was an addition to the show that wasn't part of the game, and that's the character of Gail, played by Catherine O'Hara. And she is his therapist in Jackson, and she did a really good job, and I liked their dynamic with each other in the show. I thought that was kind of a really cool mini story that they added to the adaptation of part two. And then Tommy, played by Gabriel Luna, is a badass this season, and he's like the heart of the Jackson community and the leading muscle behind it. Whereas Maria, his wife, is kind of more the brains. Um, but I would say they kind of front loaded the season with Tommy, and he's used very well in Jackson, but then kind of underused in the season as a whole. Um, and his stuff in Jackson was really good, but I did kind of want and expect to see more that we just didn't get afterward. Now Maria, played by Rutina Wesley, her relationship with Tommy was done really well this season. I think we did get to see a lot more of their relationship than we did in the single episode of season one, where we were introduced to both of them. Well, outside of the prologue with Tommy, especially in episode two, and you definitely feel that love for each other, and they do feel like a real couple. So I thought all that stuff was good. But Maria isn't really as fleshed out as of a character as Tommy is, and it's more so about her relationship with Tommy. Um, Now Abby is a new character that is very important, and she is actually the co-protagonist of the video game. But here she's played by Kaitlyn Dever, and she's only pretty much just kind of introduced this season, but she's not yet fully fleshed out as her own character. And she has ties to season one. But I feel like her portrayal in the small scenes that we got to see of her this season was kind of all over the place. When it comes to her presentation, and honestly the way that they have used her character so far was one of my least favorite things about season two. um and she's an interesting character in the game, so it's not like just the character herself, it's the way that they presented the character in this adaptation of the second game that I don't think it worked really well. And it's kind of one of the things that I was talking to you about like how the show doesn't really commit to telling the story in a particular way, and Abby's a kind of symptom of that. There's another character that's kind of aligned with Abby named Isaac, but we don't actually ever see them have scenes together in this season. But Isaac is played by Jeffrey Wright, and he's the leader of the WLF, the Washington Liberation Front, that, like I said, are the main antagonists of the season. And that's the group that Abby is a part of. Um, and Isaac in season two was used in a cool way, but he's more a tease at what's to come in season three as we kind of dive deeper into Abby's side of things. And he wasn't really a necessary part of the show this season, but anything that he did in the season, any scenes that they did give him were all really good, and I think done well. But it was kind of more of like I said, kind of set up for season three. Now the last few characters are Abby's crew, which I'm kind of just gonna group together because just like Abby herself, we don't really get to see each one that much, and even less so than we see Abby, I think. But overall, as like a little kind of unit, they were decent. So far, just like in the game, the one that seems the most interesting to me is Manny, who was my favorite and kind of the only one that I liked from that group in the game. But none of them are fully fleshed out characters this season. Um, Owen seems kind of more chill than he did in the game, but I don't have like any other feelings beyond that about him. Mel seems less chill than she was in the game, and honestly, kind of annoying. Nora is the one kind of thing that I think definitely, for so far for me at least, has actually kind of better than she was in the game. She's a lot kind of cooler, and like even she has a kind of different hairstyle, where in the game she had like a little bit thicker hair, like longer, where here she's like clean shaven and also has piercings, where which I don't think she had. So cause she they kind of added some style to her a little bit in the TV adaptation of her. That kind of just makes her cooler, I think. Manny is definitely a different take, I think, from the way that I kind of saw him in the game. But in my opinion, he's equally cool, just in a different way or for different reasons. And I'm really excited to see more of him in season three. So now I'm going to talk about the themes, which are kind of the big kind of draw of the game of Last of Us Part 2. And I would say that in season two, they continued the season one theme of love, but different from the game, it kind of focuses on that aspect a little bit more, like I previously kind of mentioned. And maybe that's intentional because it is a show, so it should kind of feel like the same thing. So maybe that's why they brought some more of those elements into it and like kind of focused on it a little bit harder. But because the story is so different from the story of season one, I feel like they should have kind of kept it a little bit more in line with the game, which focuses on hate. And the game is all about hate and the lengths that one is willing to go for their hate. And the show doesn't really commit to that theme. It is part of it, but it doesn't go all the way. And I think that's where the show definitely suffers in season two. Another theme that is in this season is parenthood, and that's also, I guess, kind of something that they continued on from season one. But I think because of Joel and Ellie's relationship, where they've been together now for 5 years with kind of that parent-child dynamic, it is kind of more prevalent, I think, this season. And we see that primarily through Joel, but we find out in season one that Tommy is also going to become a dad, and then now is a dad of a child of for 5 years. And I feel like they could have and should have done more with Tommy as a parent, but they don't just kind of don't really do anything with it really. And Tommy's son isn't even really a character; he's just a kid in on screen a couple of times, but we don't really get to see too much of that, which I think was kind of unfortunate. The last kind of theme that I could really think of that was prevalent this season is loyalty, and we see that through Ellie, her loyalty to Joel. We see it Jesse, his loyalty to Jackson as a community. We see Dina's loyalty to Ellie as a friend and eventual lover. And then we see Abby's crew as a unit with their kind of loyalty kind of dynamics where and because we don't get that much of them, we don't see much of it, but we kind of like hear about it through Isaac's side of the story and anything we see with him because we find out, well, I guess I won't go into spoilers about that, but Abby's crew didn't start with the Washington Liberation Front. They started elsewhere, and they when they moved just kind of stuck together. So we see that kind of play out through there, and that's something that I think they're definitely going to expand on in season three. Now, the last section I want to mention before I get into the nitty gritty of the season is the action, which I think was a pretty big part of season one, um, mainly with the infected. And here, um, in season two, they had some great infected action, especially in the first half of the show. Like the standouts are episode two and four, and then there's like one sequence in episode five that was really cool. Um, but in my opinion, the game had this whole kind of war backdrop in Seattle that they could have utilized more in the show, and I feel like it was lacking some of that true gritty warfare um, that I feel like should have been part of it, and it just kind of wasn't. So I did kind of feel like in that sense it was lacking, but all the infected stuff was really good, and maybe even the best that it's been in the show in general. So that stuff was cool, and if you like that stuff in season one, I think you would enjoy at least that part of season two. But that was never kind of the draw for The Last of Us, for me at least. And I feel like the actual stuff that is important is where they kind of failed in season two. So now, if you don't want to know any of the spoilers and you just kind of want to know my general thoughts, I would go give the show a watch. I do think if you like season one, you should definitely watch season two, and watch it through to the end. Um, but now I'm gonna go into the spoilers, and the way that I kind of want to talk about it is I'm gonna talk about each episode and just go through the entire season, and then I'll kind of generalize overall how I felt. So for episode one, they set up for Ellie to fight a big guy in Seattle in the very beginning when we first see Ellie in season two, outside of like the ending that we saw from season one when they get to Jackson. But she actually never uses that again in her actual battle in season two of the show. And there's a Seraphite who is a cult in both the game and the show that is the other side of the war with the Washington Liberation Front that I was talking about. And there's a big Seraphite in day two in the game that Ellie comes across that they could have brought into the game or into the show that Ellie could have fought to like pay off that kind of like premiere scene where she's training, and they just never do. And that wasn't something that I thought about until the second time I watched through the show to kind of gain my thoughts for this review. But it is a big missed opportunity when you think about it. Um, Now Joel has this conversation with Dina, where we kind of get a sense that like through Ellie, Dina has kind of formed her own separate relationship with Joel. Um, but because Ellie's kind of distant from him, Dina kind of seems closer to Joel than Ellie is at the moment that we start the show. And she kind of asks like, "Yo, like, what's going on between you and Ellie? Why is she mad at you?" And I feel like that conversation should have been a Joel conversation with Tommy as a fellow parent because Ellie is Joel's child in an adopted sense, in a kind of spiritual sense, and Tommy in the show version, which is not something that was in the game, is also a father. So that would have been something cool to see, and we never get any of that, which was a huge missed opportunity in my opinion. And like I said about Tommy and his son, like they just don't really do anything with it. It was really cool that like a cool change that they introduced in season one that they just didn't fucking deliver on in season two, and this was one way that they could have done that. Um, a part that I fucking hated in episode one is when Ellie's screaming her immunity to the world, and that was like super childish, and in my opinion, is something that season one Ellie wouldn't have done. So that's one of the things that I'm talking about like how they kind of dumb her down and just kind of change her character for unnecessary reasons in season two, where she wouldn't have done that or wasn't like that in season one. So that was just fucking stupid, and I thought that was kind of cringy. Introducing the stalker was a good scene in Jackson where it kind of set the stage for the later scene in episode 5, which is the one small infected scene that I was talking about with the action, with the stalkers there, where it's a whole bunch of stalkers, um, and that was cool. Like I didn't mind that at all. I don't know if they really necessarily needed to have introduced the stalker in Jackson, because I think it kind of would have been cool for them to introduce all of the new infected just in Seattle to show that maybe like because of the water kind of um how much it rains there, it caused like mutations in the infected, and maybe the stalkers could have been one of the examples of that. And the other example is something that we actually haven't seen yet in the show, but it is in the game, and I'm assuming and hoping they introduce it in season 3, which are shamblers, which is kind of a middle ground between a clicker and the bloater that we saw in episode I think 5 of season 1, and episode 2 of season 2, where they like shoot out fucking spores from like their back, and it's like really like a deformity where it's like a hump, and they're like kind of fatter, where the bloater is kind of like muscle, where it's like just strong and it's like armor. The shambler is like fat more so, I think. um and the stalkers were never a mutation in the game, and they were technically something that was part of the first game, but they just behaved differently, and they didn't really seem that different from runners in the first game. But in part two, they really made them like their own separate kind of stage of the cordyceps virus or infection. Um, and they could have just made that part of Seattle specifically. Um, I feel like the standout positive in episode one, which I actually did really like, especially the first time I watched it, was the chemistry between Ellie and Dina. And all of that stuff was great in not only episode one, but throughout the series. Even though I do think it was overall a mistake to kind of focus on that as much as they did, it was great every time we saw it, and I did enjoy all of that. So I guess the only other thing about episode one that I would say is the way that it starts. I feel like they should have started with Abby with that like the group after the fact of what happened in the end of season one with Joel killing his way through the Firefly Hospital, and then how it starts there in episode one of season two with Abby's crew. They could have just started with that. For some reason, they kind of showed the very ending of season one when Joel lies to Ellie and she just goes along with it, and then it kind of camera stays on Joel, kind of showing a little bit of regret for lying. I don't think we needed that. They could have just shown that in the recap of season one, and then they should have just started with Abby there, and that kind of they're on the outskirts of like the hospital itself. I think near the zoo, and we see like the giraffes again that we saw in season one. I feel like that scene was really good, and that was one of the parts that I actually did like about Abby's character in season two. And we did get a little bit kind of of an introduction of her friends. I don't think we necessarily knew all of their names at this point in the show, but we get a sense of like how each one thinks and maybe kind of acts. Um, but Abby's emotion in that scene was really good, and I think it made sense for her to have that like anger where she already has this plan to kill Joe, where everybody else is trying to just like, what do we do next? Where do we go? Trying to wrap their head around this kind of change now in their life going forward. Um, Before I continue, I kind of want to go back and talk about like the ending of season one, which the first time I watched it, I didn't really like how it ended. It felt different from the game, where the game just kind of felt right. It felt good, even though it was like maybe a kind of crazy choice for Joel to have done that of killing all these fireflies to save Ellie, who they were just gonna sacrifice for the cure, without her ever having known that she wasn't gonna survive the process. Um, Season two, it felt a little bit more hollow, like where it didn't have a good feeling, and maybe that was intentional, but because I liked the game so much, I didn't like how it was different in that way. But the real thing I think that sucked about it was that the way that the Fireflies get to Joel and Ellie in season one's finale is different. Where in the game, there's this whole other aspect to Ellie that we never got in season one of the show, which is that she couldn't swim because she was in the Boston quarantine zone her entire life, and they don't like have pools, I guess, or there's no body of water in the quarantine zone. So she just couldn't ever learn how to swim, but they have to cross water in the game, so it's like a kind of obstacle. And I feel like in the game it was definitely a gameplay mechanic, and they didn't need to use it in that way in the show, but I think they should have still kept that as part of her character because it adds to her character, and it would have been a cool way to still bring in that scene in the same way from the game. But instead in the show, it's when they're like in the little kind of hospital tent thing that Joel mentions that they kind of set up right when the outbreak kind of first started to quarantine people and just try to respond to the situation as best as the military could before it became Fedra. Um, and the Fireflies, they throw a flashbang at Joel and Ellie, which doesn't even make sense because if they're the Fireflies, they know Marlene's mission and what she was expecting for Ellie to get here to make the cure. And then maybe they don't know all the details about like the cure aspect, but they should have been on alert for like a young girl that they should be looking out for. And because she's a young girl, and obviously if there was somebody with her that wasn't trying to kill her, they had no reason to kind of be hostile towards them to throw the fucking flashbang. And it would have made more sense if, because of the current where Ellie's drowning, that's why she's unconscious when she gets to the hospital. But the flashbang didn't incapacitate Joel. It was a butt to the fucking head with the gun that did it. So Ellie, realistically, you would expect wouldn't have been unconscious unless they did the same thing to her. But why would they knock out the girl that they were waiting for this whole time? So in that kind of thought process, they would have had to have talked to her about the procedure, and it just kind of breaks the ending where in the game you don't have to go down this path of like thinking about it too much because it just makes sense. But here it doesn't make sense because she would have known, and then it would have been her choice, and the whole kind of problem of the ending of the first game and what they try to make the problem of the ending of the first season, it wouldn't be an issue anymore. Um, so I don't think they should have took that out of the show. In season two, obviously, by now she would be able to swim, but she still doesn't even really use that ability in season two. And then the only other thing that I want to mention from season one is there's a cameo from Laura Bailey, who's actually the voice of Abby in the game. But she was a nurse at the end of season one in the show, and I feel like they should have cast her as Mel, and they should have made Mel that nurse that was helping Dr. Jerry Anderson, who we don't even actually meet at all in season two, or technically in season one. We hear lines from him in season one at the ending, but he is Abby's dad, and that's Abby's whole motivation in part two and the season two of the show. Um, and I feel like that was a mistake as well, not introducing him as a character this season. I feel like we should have seen Abby's reaction to finding him dead, instead of just kind of like hearing about it. And then I could talk more about that from episode two because I think that's where we see Abby's nightmare. Thinking back on that moment. So in episode two, it starts off with her talking to herself, but it's like her present self talking to her past self when she found him. And in my opinion, that shit did not work. It was fucking stupid and ineffective. And they should have just shown us then that it should have just been in the moment, like a memory, Abby going through the hospital, like, yo, what the fuck is going on? She gets into the operating room. She finds her dad on the floor dead, which is what happens in the game. And then we could have seen her reaction. And if they wanted to, if they didn't want to actually show the dad at all and save him for like a character for season three, then they could have just shown her reaction, her face, and then later we could hear that, oh, it was her dad that she was reacting to, and I feel like that would have still equally worked the same way. But instead, it's just this fucking dumb conversation with herself that like I don't know what they were going for, but it just didn't work for me. Maybe when they expand on it in season three, it would work better. But here in season two itself, it didn't work, and I thought it was kind of cringy. Um, Owen and Mel in the show have no chemistry at all, and in the game, we get the sense that Owen doesn't really love Mel like how he loves Abby because there's this past relationship with Abby. But in the present, he's with Mel. But I do see in the game that Mel does love Owen and she's jealous of Abby because I think she feels that Owen doesn't really love her and he does love Abby. Here, I don't feel any chemistry at all either way. I don't see Owen liking Mel, and I don't see Mel really having this attraction to Owen either. So I don't know if they're gonna change it where they're not even in a romantic relationship in the show, but if not, then I don't know if they cast her right. And like I said, I think Laura Bailey would have done a great job as Mel, and she kind of actually fits the look as well. From the game at least. And it would have been a cool way to have her like have a significant cameo, especially in the second season because she was from the second game as a main character. Like how in season one we had cameos from the three main characters of the first game. The person who played Joel played James, part of David's cult in episode 8. And then we had Ashley Johnson, who played Ellie in the game, play her mom in the show, which was fucking amazing. And then we had Jeffrey Pierce, who played Tommy in the game, played the kind of right, like second in command to the leader of the kind of rebellion in Kansas City. So that was like that was a really cool aspect of season one, and I feel like they should have done that again because that wasn't the DNA of the first season in season two, but this time with Laura Bailey. And yes, she would have a bigger role being Mel, who is a big part of the game, than these other characters. But I feel like it's fine. Um, Everything they did in season one was really good, so that would have been cool. Um, Now episode two is the episode where Joel dies, and that decision was wildly divisive in the game, and I think in the show as well, from fans who are only fans of the show. Um, but I feel like that death scene just worked so much better in the game. Where even if you didn't like it, at least for me, the way I felt about it is it did its job fucking perfectly. Like there was super high tension. It was fucking crazy and kind of traumatic to witness, especially because you fucking love Joel, and you feel that hatred that Abby has and her friends kind of as well because of maybe friends that they had of these other fireflies that he killed, and the fact that their whole mission was fucked by this one act that he did at the end of the first game and first season. But in the show, Tommy isn't out there with Joel on patrol when he comes across Abby and then dies. And I feel like that was a huge mistake to have him not be part of it because that brotherly relationship I think is kind of crucial to the whole story of part 2, that him not witnessing that death, it just wouldn't hit the same way. And that's I think another reason why maybe Tommy was kind of underused in season 2, because he didn't have that same drive that he had in season one, where he actually leaves to Seattle first before Ellie and Dina. And that change, I think, is fine about him not leaving first, because in the show he does have a kid to worry about now, where he didn't have that concern in the game. But he should have been there for Joel's death. And in episode two, while Joel has already left for patrol, he goes with Dina in the show. Tommy is giving a speech to the community about like in case there's raiders, because there have been raiders in Jackson, and they always have to be watching their perimeter. And I feel like if they wanted to have that speech still, Maria could have been the one to give the speech, and that would have been given her a way to be a little bit of a bigger part of the show in season two, and not taken away from Tommy, where Tommy would be with Joe, and they would equally have an important part to play. And they could have added tension with the infected getting near their children, where instead Tommy stayed in Jackson when they have the infected coming, and they're the ones that kind of break into Jackson. And it's Tommy and Maria, but on different like levels, where Maria's on the roofs and Tommy's down on the ground. And the bloater goes after, like, a bloater's the one that busts through, and Tommy leads the bloater away from where the civilians are. Excuse me. Um, and then Maria's kind of worried for his safety. Um, and this is after Maria was shooting at the bloater, and then the bloater starts to kind of make its way in that direction, and then that's when Tommy leads it away. So instead of having that dynamic to build tension, they could have had tension with Maria there still, and her son, where the infected were really close to getting to where the children were hiding, and that could have been a cool way to build on that parenthood aspect of the themes in the show that are there, but some of it is like barely there. They could have definitely added to it in that way, and I feel like that would have been really cool. And they could have had Jesse be the one that stayed there, and he could have held down the fort because they make Jesse an even bigger part of the community of Jackson in the show, I think, where like they see him kind of as the future of Jackson. So it would have made sense to me if he was there. Um, and then this was the first time in this season where they downplay the violence of specifically of Joel's death, which was another mistake because the way that Abby kills Joel in the show is, yes, she does beat the shit out of him with a fucking golf club like she does in the game, but in the show she breaks the tip of it off, and when she finally delivers the killing blow, she just stabs him in the head, like in the back of the neck, like where the spinal cord connects to the brain. Um, and to me, that just kind of seemed a little bit more humane than the way she does it in the game, where it's a lot kind of more brutal, where she still the golf club is still attached, and if she could have broken it in the show if they wanted to do that, then she'd have just grabbed another one and started beating him with that one. And in the game, she just delivers one final fucking really powerful hit to the head that fucking cracks the skull, and then the blood is gushing out. And that, it hits because you're like, holy shit, like what the fuck? And seeing that to somebody that you love, a character that you love, it hits you hard. But it felt kind of hollow to me in the show because of how, like I said, it felt a little bit more humane. Um, and I don't think Abby would have given Joel a humane death. Even if she got out all the fucking frustration of and the satisfaction of beating the shit out of him and seeing him bruised and bloody, I still think she would have gone all the way with that final blow as well. So I didn't think that uh the death scene of Joel worked as well in the show, and even the lighting was all wrong. Where it was very brightly lit from the outside, with the snow, kind of the reflection of the sunlight off of the snow into the room. Where in the video game it was in the basement, so it was really dark and it was iced over, so a lot of light wasn't really getting through the ice, and that adds to the tension, to the tone of the scene. And I feel like the lighting is an important part of it that they just didn't do right in the show. And that is another reason why it didn't really work as well to me. The part that did work was Ellie's reaction, which I feel like was kind of more sad in the show, and that part was really good. Any Anything with Ellie and Joel in both seasons is phenomenal. So that worked, but it was just the kind of Abby side of it and the way that Joel actually dies that I don't think worked as well. Um, but the infected stuff, with their whole, like, the huge horde that first starts chasing Abby, and then they break off when they kind of make this little thing with the tendrils in Jackson, when the kind of roots of trees are growing through the pipes, and some of the cordyceps is growing there too, and that's why the infected kind of go to Jackson. That stuff was really done well, and was really fucking good, and I think definitely elevated episode 2 a lot and did a lot to make it really exciting. And it's actually a lot of people's favorite, like one of their favorite episodes of season 2. And I think that part of it is one of my favorite parts of maybe the whole season, but overall as the episode, because of the other stuff, it wasn't for me. But that stuff that most people like was really good, and I liked that as well. Now for episode 3, um, it's kind of like the aftermath of Joel's death, and we see like it's a 3 month gap after the events because Ellie got like her ribs kind of broken from a kick from Manny. So the rest of the story has to pick up after she's healed, which is 3 months later. And the last thing she has to do before she's discharged from the hospital there in Jackson is meet with Gail, the therapist of the entire Jackson community. Um, and she has this scene with Ellie where she asks Ellie about what Joel told her in the last time that she saw Joel, which I think was either the day before or the last day. No, I think it was the day before his death. And in their last meeting together, where it was actually Gail's birthday, and we find out that Gail's husband Eugene was actually killed by Joel. So she has some kind of resentment towards him, but because she's the therapist and he needs a therapist, she does her job still, but she's kind of more upfront about her feelings in a way, and she knows Joel's hiding something about that relationship with Ellie, which is what he talks about in these meetings with her, and she calls him out on it, and she's like, "You gotta say what you're feeling. You're lying to me, and I can't really help you unless you tell me." And he says like, "I saved her," which in the game is something he does say to Tommy, and that's how the game starts. I didn't mind that it was for a different person for this scene, but I definitely do think, like I said about in episode one, the scene with Dina should have been with Tommy. Um, but in episode three, when Gail asks Ellie about it, Ellie kind of lies, saying that she doesn't know what he could have been talking about. But Gail should actually know. So that scene kind of breaks in terms of like continuity when you factor in the events of episode six, when we find out exactly what happened with Joel and Eugene, which obviously involves Gail, because technically she would have already known from Ellie's reaction in episode six after she Joel lies to her again that he wouldn't have killed Eugene, and he would have done what Eugene was asking, which was to take him to the gate outside of Jackson so that he could speak with his wife. And he promises to her, but he breaks that promise and just acts like it was no big deal. And she calls him out when he starts to lie to Gail about it. And there's this kind of subtle thing that's just between Ellie and Joel themselves directly, that they don't know what's going on. Like Tommy, I don't know how much he knows about it because we don't see it in season two. But Gail has no idea, where she's like, "You swore," and he didn't swear about Eugene. He said he promises. But she asked him at the end of season one, "Swear to me that everything you said about the Fireflies is true." And he said, "I swear." So that was what she was referencing in that moment. And Gail should have picked up on that, and she should have had some idea about Ellie's or about just that divide between them, and maybe what Joel was talking about. Um, but it seems like she doesn't in episode three when she asked Ellie about it. So that was something that you noticed when you have seen the whole season. And even before the first time I watched episode three, I didn't really like that stuff in the hospital in the beginning of the episode, but everything after that is really good. And episode three is actually like one of the ones I like a little bit more than like the first two, for example. Um, because it does do the emotion side of it really well. Um, I like the scene between Ellie and Dina when Ellie's at Joel's house getting his stuff and just kind of like processing and grieving. But Dina goes there to tell Ellie that she actually knew more than she ever told her before, about the WLF members that came to kill him. And that seems really cool because that information about like, oh, I know what these people were wearing, this patch with a wolf, WLF, Washington Liberation Front. is information that Tommy doesn't tell Ellie in the game because he was the one that was witness to it in the game. So I like that that was something that they added here because it would be something that is discussed. So that was a cool kind of like addition, and it was a little bit of a flip of a different scene in the game. But I think it worked for the show's version of events. Um, I feel like episode three is the first episode that starts to make Ellie seem like logically dumb. Where maybe she was just childish in episode one, but not like dumb. But in episode three, they made it seem like Ellie wasn't going to take medical supplies or a map when she was gonna just sneak out on her own before Dina was even gonna be part of it with her. And that is just a fucking huge mischaracterization of Ellie from even her portrayal in season one because those are things that Ellie learned from Joel in season one, and they didn't need to take that away from her just to enhance Dina's character. Like they could have still made Dina smart. They could have both been equally smart or smart in different ways, but they literally made Dina dumb. I mean Ellie dumber than she was in season one, just to make Dina seem like smart, where Ellie is not so much so. So like looking at it as a whole, I definitely hated that part of it. The other thing in episode three that they kind of changed or added a little bit more to what happens in the game is Seth, where we get to see more of him, and he has like a turn where he's actually on Ellie's side about going to get revenge for for what Abby's crew did to Joel, invading the Jackson community that they have built of safety, and he's actually sympathetic to the cause and gives Ellie his gun to support her on her mission. But it's the first sign I think. Like I like that they kind of made Seth a little bit more three dimensional in that way, where he does kind of actually support. Like yes, he might be homophobic, but that doesn't mean he can't kind of rally behind Ellie for different reasons. And that's a very human thing. So I like that part of it, but it's the first sign that season two doesn't understand what part two is about, I think, because I think Seth's character in the game was a aspect to the whole point of the game, which was the theme about hate. And Seth's hate comes from his homophobia. And to me, in real life, people are who are homophobic in that way where they like literally hate seeing a homosexual couple together, which I think Seth is one of those people. They cannot get over that hate and they cannot find any sort of relationship with that person. Like they don't want anything to do with that person. So I think the show doesn't understand that some people are just like that. Like they have that hate to that extent. Like yes, there are some who maybe that they don't agree with it, but there's other things where they could find some common ground in. And Seth wasn't supposed to be one of those types of people. He was supposed to be one of those extreme people who really hates homophobics. He just can't stand it. Like it's disgusts him. So that's kind of the first part I think in the show where it starts to fall apart and lose that focus that the game had. And it's those little things that kind of add up in the season that make it not really work so well in my opinion. Um, they cut at the very end when they get to Seattle, Ellie and Dina, to the wolves, so we get kind of introduced to like how many of them there are, and we see Manny who's on like on the lookout. And I like what they added to Manny's character there at the end, where they're like, "Yo, can you check gates like 3 and 5 or something like that?" But he was originally supposed to be looking at different gates, and he's like, "Oh, what the fuck? Like first they want me to do this, now they're asking me to do that." And then like he starts to look, and then they're like, "Yo, Manny, so what's the word?" And he's like, "Give me some fucking time to look. Like you're not letting me do my job." and I like that kind of like portrayal of him, which I don't think is how we ever saw him in the game. So that was one of the aspects that I feel like this Manny might be a little bit different. But I kind of I thought that was funny, and I was kind of on his side about that. Like if it was me doing that job, I'd be like, yeah, shut the fuck up, let me do my job. So I kind of could get behind him in that scene. And I think that's all we see of Manny in season two. I don't think we ever see him again after this. Um, but I like that little moment. Now, episode four starts really well, and it starts with Isaac's kind of backstory, which happens before even the events of season one. And it's him working as a Fedra officer, but overthrowing Fedra by joining the WLF, who Fedra is already fighting at this point. And this is what the season was lacking more of that made season one so good. It's season one was a great adaptation, even though I don't think it's as good as the game. It was a great adaptation, and what it excelled at was adding to the game, enhancing things that either couldn't see in the game, or we just didn't see, or just seeing different kind of viewpoints of events that we saw in the game with like different characters. And this is the first time I think in season two that they did that, where they brought some of that DNA from season one into it. And I feel like they should have done more of that in season two. And that whole intro was really fucking cool. And I loved it. And it kind of set the stage a little bit for the wolves and how we see in the present day they've actually kind of become Fedra. They became what they hated. Um, and Isaac, we don't get like much of Isaac, but having just this introduction was really cool. Um, when Ellie and Dina get to the music shop in the game, when Ellie goes upstairs and plays the guitar, she plays a few notes of Future Days, which is a song that Joel sings to her um, on her first birthday in Jackson. And the game actually starts with that scene, with the Future Days scene with Joel and Ellie when he gives her the guitar. In the show, we don't see that until episode six, which I think that was fine overall. But in the show, when she goes up to the music store and plays, she doesn't play that. She starts right away playing "Take on Me," and I feel like that was a mistake because this is where the show starts to lose that focus of what the story is supposed to be about, what the game was about, which is more focused on Ellie's revenge quest to avenge Joel's death. And because she starts immediately with "Take on Me," that's where it starts to be like, oh, they care more about the relationship between Ellie and Dina and that romance. But in the game, I think the reason why it was important for her to play Future Days is because the entire journey, her mind is on Joel, how much she misses him, her hate for the people that killed him, and her desire to do what they did to him back onto them. And she has this little moment on her own because Dina's downstairs and she goes up and this is just her kind of grieving Joel, playing these notes. And she only plays a little, but then she's interrupted by Dina when Dina comes upstairs, and then Dina tells her, "Oh, play something for me." And that's when she starts playing "Take on Me." And I feel like they should have done it the same way in the show, but they don't. And that's where I feel like the show starts to focus more on that romance instead. And it's I think it's actually weird because it's easy to forget about Joel when we get to Seattle because of their relationship, Ellie and Dina, and we shouldn't fucking feel like that. So the game, I mean the show season two suffers for that reason, I think. Um, when we get to the subway, Dina does the counting thing that she did in episode one when they were on patrol, and they go for the clickers before Ellie falls through the building, and she like counts by listening to how many infected sounds she hears. Um, I really like that they put that in the show. And it's kind of like a nod to the game mechanic of I think it's called listen mode, and that's exactly what she's doing. She's listening. Um, but honestly, I think Ellie should have been the one to do that because in the game she's the character. She's the character we play as, and it would have added to Ellie's abilities where she's not dumb and she could actually be stealthy and she should be stealthy like in the game she is. And even in season 1 with the whole David situation when they were in the steakhouse, Ellie was fucking stealthy as fuck. She was making distractions to for David to go to, and she was able to fucking get behind him and stab him in the side and do it. He was overpowered by her because he's bigger and she was a little girl. She wasn't grown yet, and he's a grown man. But her fucking tenacity and everything is what got her through that situation. So that would have added to Ellie's character, and I don't think they needed to give Dina that. Like it would have been cool and made a little bit more sense from a game adaptation sense to have Ellie been the one to do that counting thing. Um, and that's a small thing. Like I don't mind it too much, but just thinking about it a little bit more, I do think that should have been the way that it was handled. Um, when they're running through that subway, Ellie should have made sure that Dina was ahead of her the entire time for the reason that Ellie herself knows that she can't get infected, but Dina very well can, and if she does, that's it. She's fucked. She's dead. And in the game, she does. She's like, "Go, go, you run ahead. If I get caught, fuck it. I'll try my best to get away, but I'll be fine overall in the meantime." But in the fucking show, Ellie fucking runs past Dina. Like I know Dina is like in this moment, she's kind of like stalling from the fear, but she should have fucking pushed her up. Like Ellie's supposed to fucking love Dina. I think maybe more than Dina loves her because that attraction it was from Ellie towards Dina first, and then Dina maybe kind of caught on to it and started to feel those same feelings back. So it didn't really make sense to me that Ellie would have been the one running ahead of Dina unless it was to like move something that was blocking their path. But that's not even what happened. So that was kind of like weird looking at it externally the second time watching through. Another thing that Ellie should have done in season 2 was when they got to the theater, she should have showed Dina the chemical burn when after Dina like was like, "Oh shit, you got bit," and she's like, I'm gonna fucking have to kill you," like, and she's torn about that realization that she thinks that she has to do, and she should have showed her right away and explained about the chemical burn, like, "Yo, I'm immune. I did this when I got to Jackson because I wanted to hide my bite mark from the first time I was bit." But instead, she doesn't do that. Um, and she tells her like, "Oh, I'm just gonna sit over there. You keep your gun trained on me the whole time, but I promise you, I'm not gonna turn." And she kind of like stalls a little bit. Um, that's just like another small thing. I like things where it just doesn't really make sense the way that Ellie handled the situation. But it didn't really matter in the long run. Because it still plays out the same way. But um, she also got bit in Jackson when with the stalker there in episode 1. So she could have also shown her that one because that one's a little bit fresher and it would be a little bit more obvious because it doesn't have the burn mark covering it where that could be anything. But she doesn't mention that until episode 5 when they see the stalkers again. Um, Now, another thing that I thought about rewatching season 2 is how the episode 4 ends with a sex scene between Ellie and Dina. And it's after Dina realizes, like, "Oh, well, Ellie's telling the truth. She must be immune because she hasn't changed yet. And by now you would." And she's realized at this point that she's pregnant because at the beginning of the episode she finds a pregnancy test and before that, or actually, did she throw up already? Yeah, she threw up in episode 3. Yeah, so she threw up, so she was having morning sickness, and then she does a pregnancy test because she finds it at the pharmacy, and it confirms that yes, she is pregnant. so she knows. But this is the moment that she reveals it to Ellie. And as soon as that happens, she like embraces Ellie lovingly, and they start making out, and then they go all the way and have sex. And I didn't mind that scene originally the first time I watched it, and I thought it actually worked because of those like heightened emotions, especially Dina because she's pregnant. You know, her hormones might be all over the place. So to for her to kind of act like that in that moment, it did make sense. But I feel like putting the sex scene there at the end of this episode, the part about the take on me moment, shows the series losing focus on that revenge mission and prioritizing that romance, because like, okay, it's fine to have like little moments with Ellie and Dina, but for them to have sex while on this revenge mission, I don't know, it's just kind of weird. So in the game, they do have sex, but it's before Joel dies, so it makes sense for them to have it back in Jackson. Here, I don't know if it makes sense when you think about it. Yes, Dina explains the morning after that it's because she started to imagine this life with Ellie, and once she realized that she was pregnant, like this life with her baby, with that she would have wanted to share with Ellie, and when she got bit, she was like, all that shit is down the drain, it's all out of the window. But when she realizes like, oh, Ellie actually is immune, so I can have this life, so she goes for it. She That's when she reveals that she loves Ellie the same way that Ellie loves her, and that reasoning behind it makes sense, but it's just the moment and the context of like they're in this fucking space where they're on this quest that they're looking for these wolves, and at this point they have um past wolves, and I think Ellie and Dina each killed one wolf before the subway sequence when they're in the TV station or radio station, I think maybe in the show. Um, and it's just kind of awkward. So I think maybe it was a mistake to have moved that scene. Um, if they really wanted to have a change, like if it didn't really work in episode two, they could have honestly just made it so that they were already a couple in the show, and I feel like that would have worked. Maybe they could have even had like a mini kind of pre-season just showing some of Joel and Ellie's time in Jackson, where they could have shown their first intimate moments together before starting, where they're already a couple. I don't know. There's a lot of options. They could have done a lot of things that would have added or just changed the story from what we saw in the game. And for TV, I think it would have made sense and it would have worked. But that's all I guess I'll say for episode four. And episode five is the episode that I think does the worst job of like making Ellie seem stupid. And she even calls herself stupid more than fucking two time than one time in the show. Like even zero times is too much, but more than once in the same episode calling herself stupid is stupid itself. And I'm like, it's kind of annoying and it's weird. I noticed by the end a lot of characters actually say I'm not stupid, and that's the way that Ellie says it. And that's kind of weird that in season two that that phrase came up so much, and I wonder like why subconsciously in the writer's mind like that is the case. But it's kind of just weird thinking about it. um Now, when so like at the end of episode four, they find out about Nora, that she's at the hospital, and they see an explosion. So they assume that it's like this war between the WLF and the Seraphites, who they crossed on the path in episode three and found them dead. But then they see that they hung up these wolves in the TV station in like horrific ways. So they see that both sides are pretty fucked up. and Ellie, makes a plan to go out, and she's like, I don't know, now that she knows that she's pregnant, she's like, I don't know if you should go. But Dina says, no, we're gonna go together. We're gonna do this shit together. Just because I'm pregnant doesn't mean I can't help. And I was fine with that choice. I like that they gave Dina a little bit more agency, but I think it was wrong of her when they actually go back out to go after Nora, for Dina to have left the choice to continue on up to Ellie. Because then it kind of contradicts itself. Like, first they gave her more agency by making her want to go and insisting on going, but then takes it away by her giving the choice to Ellie. Like, she tells her, if you want me to go, I'll go. If you want me to stay, I'll stay. Whatever happens, it's not on you, it's on me. But in a way, she's putting it onto Ellie, and I feel like that was unfair. I did like her backstory. That was a good addition. I think we hear about that backstory in day one in the game when they find Tommy's victim, Nick, who was another member in the game version that was part of Joel's murder. Um, and she tells Ellie about, I think about her sister. I don't know if she mentions her mom. I forget exactly how she says it. But here, I don't know if the story is exactly the same, or if the lore is the same. But I like that they, dived into that a little bit. And she's like, if so, in the game they're both dead, Dina's mom and her sister. I don't know if that's the case in the game as well. It probably is, but I don't remember. Um, she's like, if the killer got away, I would track him down. I would hunt him to the end of the earth. And that's why she's like, she'll do the same for Joel. She'll help Ellie, who's more invested in that mission, but she'll be there beside her the entire way. So I like that part. Um, but just leaving that choice up to Ellie, I didn't like that little aspect of that scene. Um, and if I was Ellie, I would have done the opposite. I would have said like, no, you stay, like, because they see a bunch of seraphites on the wall where they were executed, like a public execution style. Like how Fedra used to do to civilians, which shows that the WLF has become Fedra. And Dina barfs again in this scene, second time that she's seen Seraphites dead. Um, when Ellie actually gets to the hospital, um, and she chases after Nora, like she says the badass line to Nora of like, you, when they're like, we could have killed, when Nora says like, we could have killed you, and she's like, maybe you should have, or maybe you should have stayed the fuck out of Jackson. That line delivery wasn't quite as badass in the show as in the game, but even beyond that, the chase with Nora is more badass in the game. And she actually gets to Nora before she goes down to where there are spores, and it's actually like a crack in the wall, um, like in the ceiling leading to the lower level. But like they're both cornered because the other wolves are chasing after Ellie while Ellie's chasing after Nora. So Ellie kind of takes Nora hostage, and she tells them like, yo, back the fuck up. And that was like a cool little moment that they just completely cut out of the show. And I don't know why. Like, it was way more badass because then she drops down because they're like, you got nowhere to go, because they know that there's spores down there. But Ellie, is immune, so she can do that, and it adds a little bit more tension, and it gives Nora a little bit more to do as well because she does fight back against Ellie. Where in the show, I don't think they don't ever have an actual physical confrontation. Um, So that like kind of sucks actually. Especially because Norris does seem a lot cooler in the game. I mean, in the show. Um, and when she actually goes down to the lower level, it didn't make as much sense in the show because she goes right when Ellie's kind of coming in the room because she's got nowhere to go, and she sees that on both sides, like the elevator's kind of open, so she could just get to the other side, like on the opposite side, on a different hall, on the same level. But when she steps on the elevator, the weight of it, it's kind of like run down, so it falls, and that's what gets her to the lower level. But Ellie's right behind her, so realistically, she should be able to just shoot her right there, and then the wolves that are chasing after Ellie come, and Ellie has to climb down, which would have taken a lot of time. So the wolves would have been able to go and same thing, and even more so, been able to kill Ellie on the spot there. Whereas in the show, I mean, in the game, it makes more sense because they can't just jump down after Ellie when she drops down with Nora. They got to make sure they put their masks on, it's secure so that they don't breathe in any of the spores. So the realism is also kind of um, less in the show. The last thing about episode 5 that I want to mention is that I feel like in this episode, before this is when we see Jesse. So we see that Jesse has followed Ellie and Dina to Seattle, and Jesse does tell them that he came with Tommy, and because of that, I feel like they should have shown us in this episode Tommy's decision to go to Seattle because it's a bigger deal in the show than it was in the game. In the game, it's just kind of obvious, it makes sense. But in the show, there is kind of more of a thinking of a plan that is it worth it that Tommy has to go through. And I feel like they should have shown him going through that, thinking about it. Like, should I go? Like, I have my son here. He needs me. I should stay. I'll send Jesse. And then he's like, no, like, I gotta go with him too. But they don't show that. So like this was one of the things that I was missing the most from season 2 in terms of like things that they could have done that was different from the game, and they just didn't, and it would have given us a little bit more Tommy as well. And I was expecting that beforehand, and we just never got it. So then I guess I kind of disappointed myself, but I do think that was something that we should have seen. And it's possible we could still see that, but I don't think it would really work as well next season. So I don't think we're gonna see it, and that's just unfortunate because, like I said, Tommy is a parent in the show, and they don't really show us that side of him. Um, Now there's one other thing that I'm gonna throw in here. It's not really about the show though. It's more so about the game, where there's a whole kind of action sequence that's cut out of the show that was in the game, where Ellie first, before she even knows about Nora, hears, well, they she knows that Tommy's there obviously, because that's different. Where in the game, Tommy goes, and then Ellie and Dina go, and then Jesse goes separately. In the show, Ellie and Dina go, and then Tommy and Jesse go together after them to make sure they come back safe. But while Ellie is looking for Tommy on her own in day 2, because Dina's too sick and she stays at the theater in the game, she comes across a bunch of wolves, and there's like this huge action sequence where it's really intense, and they're like fucking on her because there's just a whole bunch of them in this like rural area, um, like suburban area. I guess it's not really rural, suburban area called Hillcrest. And along that, she passes through a house where she comes across another stalker who actually is named. And there's like backstory that we could see from papers that we could pick up as like collectibles in the game. And his name is Boris Yegoslav. And even before the outbreak of cordyceps, he was like an archer. So he has a bow, and that's where Ellie gets her bow from in the game in part 2. And I kind of wish they would have included that. And they could have even this could have been another instance where like in episode 4 in the beginning we got Isaac's backstory. We could have gotten this like little mini story with Boris and seen everything that we could read about in the game actually happen on screen. And then it could have led us to Ellie when she's there. She comes across him, and that's why we would have been able to be seeing it as like the cold open. And she could have got her bow from him. And I feel like the bow is Ellie's kind of signature weapon, at least visually. When you see Ellie, like you see her with a bow. And this was already something we didn't get in season one, where neither Joel nor Ellie get a bow in season one. And I was willing to look past it in season one, but I feel like in season two they should have corrected that misstep in season one by giving it to her here, and this would have been where she could have gotten it from, and that would have been really cool. But they didn't, and it was okay. Like it was not a necessity, but I feel like it would have added to the show a lot more, and it would have made it feel a little meatier than it ends up feeling by the end, where it's like we get less than we got in season one. So that was just one other little thing. Now, episode 6, I heard is a lot of people's favorites, and it is one of my favorites as well. I still, even though there's problems with episode 4, overall my enjoyment of it, I still prefer that one over episode 6, and that was the case the first time and the second time watching through. But episode 6 is definitely a standout in not only season 2, but also the entire series, season 1 and 2. And this episode is Joel's episode, and we see everything from his journey of being Ellie's father and just being a father in general. And that's where that theme really hit comes in. And we do get a cold open in episode 6 with Joel and Tommy as kids and seeing their relationship with their dad, where they had an abusive dad. And that was done really, really well. And it is kind of bookended in this episode where Joel's dad tells him like, when you have a kid, I hope you do a little bit better than me. Even though I'm not perfect, I'm doing better than my dad did. Because even though Joel and Tommy's dad, Javier Miller, was abusive, his father was like abusive in more extreme measures, where he fucking broke his fucking jaw. Broke Javier's father broke his jaw when he was a kid. I think he said he was 10. And yes, he does hit Tommy and Joe, but he doesn't beat them like that. So that's what he says. And that stuff was really good, and it made sense thematically for this episode to have included that, and we get to see some backstory with Joel and Tommy that we never knew about before. So it added to the show in the way that like season one did a lot of stuff like that. Now, there's also kind of a little Easter egg here, because the reason why Joel and Tommy think that their dad is gonna beat Tommy in the beginning of this episode is because he was either buying or selling drugs. I'm not sure which one it was, but that aspect, it actually connects to Sarah's joke in the season one premiere, where he's like, "Where'd you get the money to fix my watch for his birthday?" And she's like, "Drugs." I said, "Hardcore drugs." And it's funny because that's a thing that we find out here is part of their family, where Tommy had this problem with drugs, whether he was selling or buying. So it kind of ties back in a cool way like that. And that was a cool kind of Easter egg. Now this is when we get to see Joel sing Future Days to Ellie. And it does happen on her first birthday in Jackson. It's just that we don't see it at the beginning of the story. We see it here in episode 6. But it makes sense to do it because this episode's all about Joel and his relationship with Ellie. And when he's giving her the guitar, she was eating her cake with her bare hand just because she was fucking hungry, and she was still, I think, on painkillers, drugs, so she's kind of like acting funny. And she tells Joe to play something, and he's like, and she tells him to sing too, and Joe says like, I don't sing, And she should have reminded Joel in that moment that he told her in season one that he had always wanted to be a singer. So sing for me. She doesn't like think about it, I guess, and maybe the writers didn't think about that when they wrote it. But I feel like that could have been something cool that would have made sense for her to say there. But either way, that scene was done really well, and I really like Pedro Pascal's rendition of Future Days. It had kind of a Johnny Cash feel, which was a little bit different from video game Joe, which is still cool, but in a different way. And I think that one is kind of more unique. Um, and then we see, I think it's a year later after that. Oh no, a year after that is the birthday scene where they go to the museum. And that stuff was done pretty perfectly. I kind of missed the um dinosaur skeletons, but I understand why it was cut for time. But then we see a year after that when Ellie turns 17, where she's like deep in her relationship with Kat, which is a relationship that we never see in the game, but we get to read about it in Ellie's journal. There's different moments in the game where we get to see like different parts of that of her previous years in Jackson before the events of the game, and that was a nice addition to the story for us to actually get to see some of that relationship. And we did see Kat in episode one, but at this point, Ellie has seemingly like lost interest in Kat, and Kat is seems kind of on the same page too, where they don't really love each other like that. I kind of wished we would have actually got more of Kat, like one of the moments, particularly when like Ellie's first forming feelings for Kat that we read about in the game. And this is some of the stuff that could have been included in like that like kind of preseason mini story. But it's whatever. Like it's not really that important, but it would just be kind of fun to see something like that. And then after that, it's I think 2 years later when it's the big divide, the big rift that is like formed between Ellie and Joel, where at 17 she wants a little bit more independence, but overall I think they still have a good relationship. But then it's this year after where is we get to see what happened with Eugene, which we heard about in episode one, and all Joe had to do with Eugene after they find him and they find that he's bit and he asks like, okay, I want to go to the wall, you could tie me up, but I want to say goodbye to Gail. I think that was a reasonable request, and all Joe had to do was put Eugene on Ellie's horse because he knows that Ellie can't get infected. And if he did turn on the way over, she would be fine. Like he would have had to kill her then, or she would have killed him. But at least he gave her the chance, gave him the chance, gave Eugene. And I think it was fucked up what Joel did, and just straight up lying to Ellie about it. Um, I bought it in the show, but like some people in season one were complaining that they kind of were villainizing Joel a little bit more than it seemed like the game ever did. And in season two, I think in this moment even more so. And I would agree, especially here, that they do because like there's no reason for Joel to have not done what Eugene was asking. It would have been fine. And if they wanted to, he could have been walking like behind the horse, or even ahead of the horse, like on a like a rope or something to keep them away. Um, and it was dumb on the way back after he kills Eugene, which Eugene's death actually was a kind of an emotional part as well. Like Joe Pantoliano, who played Eugene in this episode, did a really great job at like me getting us the audience to believe his fucking emotions, like being so severe and extreme, like him dying, like he knows he's gonna die, so he's like, yo, I gotta do this. But on the way back after he killed Eugene, It was dumb that Joel told Ellie that he would tell Gail only what she needed to hear, but no more. But then he does the exact opposite and he just straight up lies to Gail instead of saying all she needed to know. And that I think made it even worse where Ellie's like, no, fuck this guy. And she tells Gail what actually happened. Like he Eugene wanted to come see you. Joel promised us both that he would get him to you, but then he shot him in the head. And then Gail's like, yo, what the fuck? And she slaps Joe, which reasonable reaction. And then she tells him, you swore to me. And she walks away. And that happens differently in the game where she finds out not from him lying again and knowing his lying face, but by actually going back to St. Mary's Hospital to see what happened because she knows that he was lying. Like she had this gut feeling that he lied about it, and she just needs that closure. So she goes all the way back there by herself, and there's some tapes that the Fireflies left about what happened, and that's how she finds out. And she asks Joel to admit it when he gets back because he follows her. Like obviously he's worried about her when she leaves Jackson, and that's when he finally tells her, like, yeah, I did, I killed them. And she breaks down and she's like, I don't want to fucking speak with you again. And that's where the rift happens in the game. The way that they changed the scene, I liked it. I think it worked, and it actually kind of makes more sense that that's how she would find out instead of needing to go all the way back to the hospital because that's maybe kind of a little bit unrealistic, especially if she didn't like come across anybody on the way. Um, so it's kind of more streamlined way, and I like the whole Eugene subplot. Um, although I think um I think they could have like done it a little bit differently where maybe Joel did need to kill Eugene. Um, and we could have maybe even seen more of Eugene with like Tommy and stuff because we know in the game that Eugene and Tommy served together as Fireflies. So like stuff like that where they could have made Eugene more of a character instead of just in this one episode. Um, but overall, like I liked Joe Pantoliano's role in the show and the way that they executed everything here. Now, seeing the dance 9 months later, from Joel's perspective, was a really nice touch. And this was another thing that season one did really well, where in episode five, which was my favorite episode of season one, we got to see Joel and Ellie getting to Kansas City from Henry and Sam's perspective. Well, I guess from Henry's perspective, because Sam didn't see it. Um, and we follow them their whole journey until they meet up with Joel and Ellie when Joel and Ellie wake up to them being there. This was another cool moment like that where we see that dance where originally we see it from Ellie's perspective, but now we see it from Joel's perspective, and we get to see a little bit more of the characters involved in that with Tommy, Maria, and their son, who I don't even know if they ever say his name, which is fucking weird as well. Now that I think about it. So that was cool, and then we get to see the aftermath where in episode one, it seems like Ellie walks past Joe when she gets back home, and that's it. That's the last time she ever saw him alive until he was in his dying moments. But then here we see, oh, she did walk past, but then she eventually came back and she spoke with him, and it's the porch scene. And the porch scene in the game is actually the very end of the game, the last time that Ellie plays the guitar, and she remembers that she forgave Joel, and now in this act, she forgives Abby for having killed him, and that's kind of what her journey in this second game is about. It's about forgiveness. Um, But here we see it now in episode 6 before we even get to the finale of this season. And I think it worked for what this episode was. It made sense to end it there. Um, but now I kind of wonder how they're gonna end the overall story for Ellie. By the time we get to the end of all of the events of The Last of Us Part Two, um, and I wonder if it's gonna hit the same way. But that porch scene did hit, and I think this was the one emotional scene where I think I did shed some tears in season two. Where in season one, on my rewatch, I actually cried 3 times, and I was close to crying a fourth time. Um, so for me, it was Joel telling Ellie I would do it all over again, and she says because you're selfish, and he's like no, because I love you, and he's like breaking when he says it. That shit fucking hit, and like both of the acting in that scene was fucking top notch. Like Bella Ramsey, Pedro Pascal fucking killed it, and I love that scene. And I think it's actually a little bit better in the show than it was in the game, but it was also very good in the game as well. Um, the only thing though is like Ellie asks Joel those questions that she did in the game when she's at St. Mary's here at the porch scene, so they kind of combine those two scenes. Um, and she asked Joel like, could they have made a cure? Could the Fireflies have made a cure for my blood? And she should have recalled that in season one, she tried to use her blood to cure Sam when Sam told her that he was infected or showed her. She wiped her blood on him and it didn't do nothing. He still turned and then he died the next morning. And that should have been enough for her to like think about it and be like, you know what? Like maybe Joel was kind of right. Like maybe he wasn't lying about it. Maybe he actually believed that they couldn't have made a cure and kind of give him the benefit of the doubt about it. And Joel, when she asked, should have said that he didn't know, but he says, yeah, they could have made a cure. He should have said that he didn't know because he didn't know, and honestly, they probably couldn't have. Like it might have failed, and it would have been for nothing. And I think Joel made the right choice at the end of season one, especially because they didn't give him the opportunity to say goodbye to Ellie, and they didn't give her the opportunity to make it her choice to sacrifice her life. So I kind of didn't like that aspect where it kind of makes Ellie like more mad. Where at this point in the game, when this scene happens, she's already on the path to forgiving him. But here she's like still mad, and she's like, I would like to try to forgive you in the future, but she's not really there yet. Um, so that was just a thought that I had. And just a little kind of side note about episode 6, which, like I said, is a standout. Episode 6 this season is like the opposite of episode 7 in season 1, but they're both similar in the fact that they're kind of like battle episodes where it's outside of the main events of the season, and they're both technically like kind of prequels to the events of the main season. But episode 7 in season 1 kind of like undercuts and like kind of halts the momentum of the season. Whereas here in episode 6, like this is the fucking shit that we liked about season 1. And it's kind of the opposite where the rest of the season is kind of like mediocre. This episode excels where I liked episode 7 in season 1, but it does kind of undercut that kind of trajectory and the momentum of the show. And I feel like on a rewatch, if I ever watch the season again, I'll probably just skip episode 7 to be honest. But I'll never skip episode 6 of season 2. Episode 7. Um, at the end of episode 5, having Dina be there and being the one to get hit by the Seraphite arrow in the woods made the opening for the finale episode 7 work really well because it adds like that tension and that scene with Jesse and Dina where Jesse finds out like directly in that interaction with Dina that she is pregnant. And I really like that change in the show. Like that was really really good where he like tells her to take a drink and she's like no, and he's like come on, it's gonna help the pain, and she's like no. So then that's how he figures out that oh she must be pregnant. Um, and then when Ellie comes back, um, all the episode has been good so far, but then the episode lost me when Ellie responds when Dina says maybe Nora got what she deserved because she sees that Ellie's kind of like, she doesn't feel good about what she had to do of torturing her. And then Ellie responds, maybe she didn't. And for me, the reason why I got lost at that part, like where I just stopped like believing it, is that in my opinion it's too early in the story of part 2 for Ellie to start having doubts about the mission. Like yes, she could feel different than she did before because this is the first time she's ever tortured somebody. So she should feel like, guilt about the torture part, but she shouldn't feel that she didn't deserve it because Nora does deserve it. And she says that little bitch got what he deserved about Joel. And Ellie should not quickly get over that. She should hold that shit like, yeah, fuck Nora. She's a fucking bitch. Like, I wish I didn't have to do that to her, but she fucking made me because she didn't tell me what I needed to know. So Ellie shouldn't feel less motivated to continue. She should feel guilt for the acts that she had to commit, the atrocious act, but she shouldn't feel less motivated to continue. But she does in the show. And this is like I think the biggest episode where like the violence is really kind of scaled back where Ellie seemed kind of like lost at this stage. And in episode 5, the ending of episode 5 I thought was actually the height of capturing that essence of the game with the violence. But then here it's like quickly backtracks and it goes the opposite direction and it's just weird. Um Jesse, when he gets there in episode 5, and then even more so here in episode 7, I did not like his attitude toward Ellie, where the entire time he's kind of antagonistic towards her. And it seems like he doesn't even like her. Like he maybe never liked Ellie as a person, and maybe he's not even friends with her. It seems like maybe he only cares about Dina, and that's his friend. I think his reaction to finding out he was gonna be a father and him speaking about that with Ellie, that made sense. But just the way he was treating Ellie, I didn't like that shit. And that's not how Jesse is in the game. In the game, all three of them are a unit and they're all friends with each other and they all get along. And Jesse even says if Ellie would have told him, he would have went with them, with Ellie and Dina, who right away in the game version were already on the same page about going. Here, Ellie didn't know and ask Dina if she wanted to go. She was just gonna go on her own, but then Dina goes to her, and because she knows Ellie's gonna go, and she's like, "All right, I'll go with you. I'll help you." Um, so like for that reason, I kind of don't really like Jesse that much in the show version, and I liked him before, even though we didn't really get enough of him in either the game or the show, because here he just seems kind of like a self-righteous asshole, and that self-righteousness was never a part of Jesse in the game. Like he was a sap, like he cared and loved his friends, but he didn't do it because he thought he was like, good or better than anybody, and like that they were doing something dumb where that's kind of how he treats Ellie. And honestly, both Jesse and Dina kind of seem to have this like negative look about Ellie that I feel like is unfair in the show. But Dina's just more kind of like on the opposite side where she says like she kind of loves that about Ellie, which is okay. But then Jesse, it seems like he does not like that. He's like you put everybody at risk, and it is true. But in the game, it's everybody's own choice what they're doing in the game, and here it's like they make it Ellie's fault, and I didn't like that. Um, when they get to the bookstore where they're supposed to be meeting up with Tommy, um, they have this conversation where it was kind of interesting to have Jesse say that he actually loved someone else more than he loves Dina, somebody that like passed through Jackson but then left. He said that he kind of wanted to go with her, but because of this community that like raised him and brought him in, he felt responsibility for staying in Jackson, and that's why he did. I don't know if I really like that aspect of like him not actually loving Dina fully like in that way, because in the game I'm pretty sure he does. Like he loves Dina, it's just that she doesn't really love him in that way fully, the way that she does Ellie, and Ellie loves her. So they're more of a better couple than Dina and Jesse. Um and even if they had this be part of it, which is okay, I feel like Jesse should have still mentioned his mom, which is what is the scene in the game. That's the conversation in the game where he's thinking about being a father, and he's like, my mom used to read me these stories because they're in a bookstore, and he tells Ellie about it. And in the show, Ellie gets a book to bring back to Dina for JJ, who, it's the first time I'm mentioning JJ, is gonna be the baby that Dina does have. Um, and I was kind of missing that about Dina, about Jesse talking about his parents, because I'm hoping that we would see them in season 3, or whenever we see the farm part of the game when JJ's born. Like that would be something cool that they could add to the show, because we don't ever see Jesse's parents in the game, but we do hear about them. Um, so it's like little things like that that I feel like it was unnecessary changes. This would be one of those. And then, even though I don't like Jesse's view of Ellie, the scene where he reveals to her that in episode 3 he voted against sending a group from Jackson to Seattle, I think was done really well, and it does make sense for this version of Jesse, given everything that we now know about him. And Ellie's reaction to that was really good as well, where previously they see that the Seraphite running away from some wolves, and then the wolves just mistreat him by stripping him and then dragging him across the floor before they presumably kill him. And Ellie kind of wants to save him because he's like he's outnumbered and outmatched, and it's like, it's just cruel, pretty much. Like they could have just killed him instead of they're drawing it out. So she wants to save him, which shows Ellie's character that she is a heroic character. And Jesse's like, no, like we're just gonna get ourselves killed if we intervene. And Ellie throws that back at Jesse's face when he starts talking about the Jackson community, like it wasn't in the best interest to send somebody. And Ellie is reasonably upset about that, and she's like, the community, like, I'll tell you about my community. My community, I had to watch get beaten to death and killed in front of me, and her community is obviously Joel, and that scene hit really well. I really like that scene a lot. And she's like, "You would have let a kid die today, Jesse," and she throws his self righteousness back in his face. Like, she was willing to put her life on the line, even aside from her mission, to go save this random stranger, but Jesse wouldn't have. And it made sense for Jesse to make that choice because he needs to go after for his soon to be born child, and that's what he's thinking about. Those are his priorities. But this kind of like clashing between them, I think they kind of enhanced it a little bit from the game, where it's kind of a little bit quicker in the game, and it's just that like Ellie just wants to continue the mission, where Jesse wants to go for Tommy, which he knows is in a different direction. So I did like that scene. Um, when Ellie gets the boat in the show, she gets washed onto shore to the Seraphite Island, and I feel like instead of that being an obstacle, if they needed an obstacle in the episode, Ellie should have ran into a shambler or some other infected presence, because that scene on the Seraphite Island was kind of pointless. Because literally all it did was slow things down. And if they were gonna do that, I feel like something should have happened besides her just being like about to get hanged and gutted by the Seraphites. Um, Especially because that's something that happens to Abby, which I'm assuming we're gonna see next season. So it would be kind of redundant if that does happen now in season three, because we already saw that about to happen here. So they should have just saved it for season three with Abby, and now it seems like they kind of took a moment away from Abby's story and gave it to Ellie for no reason at all. So I feel like Ellie should have crossed paths with one of Abby's allies on the island if they were gonna put her there. Like she could have seen Lev before Abby and Yara get to Lev later. Because I don't know the exact timeline, obviously, like when everything happens on both sides. I just know that Abby's on that same island or will soon be on that island when Ellie gets there in the show. But she's going after Lev because Lev is trying to run to his mother because originally he ran away. And yeah, but anyway, that's not really part of season two, so I won't really go into that too much. But it would have been cool if like Ellie saw Lev as like a little kind of like tease for season three, and they could have even already cast Lev. And I don't know what the casting situation is like for season three. Maybe they haven't gotten that far yet, but it would have been cool if they did. And even if they had to like recast, still it would have been cool if it was intended to be Lev. That Ellie sees there. Now when she gets back to the aquarium and Ellie confronts Owen and Mel, and she hears Owen knows about Abby's location, and she's trying to get him to tell her where she is. She tells Mel, like, all right, you're gonna point on this map to where she is, which is something that she learned from Joel in season one, which I don't know if she actually learned in season one or if it's just kind of supposed to be implied. Um, but in the game, she does talk about that when she and Dina comes across one of Tommy's tortured victims, where he does the same thing. And she tells Mel that she's got to do it, and then she's gonna tell Owen to do it. But then Owen says that he'll show Ellie because he kind of doesn't trust Mel to not like to lie. He thinks like, oh, she is gonna tell Ellie where Abby is, and he can't have that. So he says he'll do it. But then his plan is that he's gonna get a gun so that he could kill Ellie to protect that information. And I feel like Ellie should have been firm with her demands when he says that, and she should have snapped at him like, no, shut the fuck up. I said she's gonna do it, and like held her ground there, and that would have been a way to kind of make Ellie a little bit more badass and show that kind of like darker, violent side to her. And honestly, like Ellie being a badass, I feel like she wasn't so much this season, and she was in season one, like when she fucking breaks David's fingers and she says the line, and that line delivery in season one was so fucking good, matching the quality in the game when she's like, when she reveals her name to David, she's like, tell your fucking group that Ellie's the little girl that broke your fucking finger. And that was a badass moment. Here they could have had something like that there with Owen, but she's just like a fucking lost puppy. That's how she acts. So I hated that shit. And and it was lame making it a stray bullet that killed both Owen and Mel, because that also takes away from that violence that she's capable of committing, because it makes it seem kind of like an accident. Like, yes, she probably was not gonna intend to kill them. She just needed that information, and I believe she would have walked away as long as she could have made it out there safely without or by doing that. But because he makes that move and she's all the way over here, she shoots and it fucking kills him, and it goes through both his neck and Mel's neck because Mel is right behind them. she could have still been like violent towards Owen while he's bleeding out on the floor. She could have been like, "What the fuck did you make me do?" when she sees that Mel's pregnant. Because in the game, she's like, she I think stabs Owen in the neck, but then she puts a gun to his fucking wound, and she's like, I don't know what she said, but she says something, and he's telling her that she's pregnant because she doesn't see it yet in the game. And like they should have added some of that where Ellie is like, really fucking savage in this moment, but instead she's just like I said, like a lost puppy, and it just takes away from her character. So yeah, I don't know, I didn't like that. I did like the kind of flip though, the response of Mel after she's hit, and I feel like it was effective and made her death a little bit even more tragic than it was in the game, because instead of like really blaming Ellie, she's just trying to ensure that her baby is born, or it's possible that her baby survives, and she tells Ellie to cut it out of her, which is crazy. Like that was a crazy addition, and Ellie should have cut away anyway, even though she didn't know where to cut, because either way the baby would have died. But if she at least tried, she could have possibly saved it, even if ultimately the baby would have still died. Like I don't know, she just kind of like blacks out, or like she thinks that it's useless, so she just starts crying. And the other thing about this scene is like in the game, Ellie's ears start ringing when she realizes that Mel was pregnant. And this was something they did do in the show with Joel's death, but they never brought it back. And this would have been a good place to bring it back here in the same way that the game did it. And it would have shown like how she has PTSD in the same way that Joel had PTSD in season one, where that happened to him in episode 6, when he's looking for Tommy, when they finally get like near Jackson, because he thinks maybe Tommy's dead, and we saw it in episode 1 of him thinking back to when Sarah died. And it could show that comparison of like Ellie, her arc in the games at least, and I believe in the show, the way they that Gail talks about her in episode 3 with Tommy, is that her fate is to become Joe, and this would be a good way to have shown that like comparison between them. But they don't do that, and instead it's just more like she's just crying about it, and it's not like her kind of blacking out from that guilt. So I think that the guilt of the moment, I think, was more effective in the game, whereas here it's just like she's like a little sad puppy, and it just doesn't hit the same way. The ending, when they're back at the theater and then Abby shows up, the cut was fucking laughable. And I'm sorry to the editor, but that shit was fucking garbage. In the game, first of all, like Abby thinks that Tommy is the one that killed her friends, because she had already seen Tommy at an earlier point, and Tommy was there for Joel's death, so she thinks that Tommy's the one going after revenge for her killing Joel. But she sees Ellie, and Ellie tells her like, I'm the one that you want. It was me. I killed Owen and Mel. Let him go. But she's like, Abby tells her like, we let you both live, and you wasted it. Here she says we let you live because it's only Ellie in that scene, because Dina was the one that witnessed Joel's death in the moment before Ellie got there in episode 2. So she only says you, talking to Ellie. But in the game, it's like she slowly lifts the gun up, and she like has this hate in her heart, knowing that it's Ellie that fucking killed Owen and even her fucking dog, which is another aspect where they never went that far in the game, which I was expecting it in episode 5, in day 2, when she got to the hospital, because they had the dogs there. I was expecting to see a dog get killed, And that would have gone a lot. They would have done a lot of work for showing the lengths that Ellie is willing to go, because dogs, they're trained to do things. It's not really their fault. So they are kind of innocent creatures in that sense, and it would show that like she's crossed some lines. But anyway, aside from that, um, it cuts when Abby lifts the gun up, but we don't hear any gunshot. We don't know what happens. And then that's when the game switches, where we have to play as Abby, and we play as Abby from the beginning. And there's this whole sequence where this is where we kind of see her at the zoo near the hospital in Salt Lake, that we got in the first scene of season 2. But it's not after they're burying everybody like they show in season 2. It's like before her dad dies, and we get to see some moments with her and her dad. And then it ends with her finding her dad dead, and then it cuts again to, it's like this flip, which actually, now I think about it, why the fuck didn't they do that? It's like what I said about earlier, how season 1 and then episode 6 showed the dance from Ellie, from Joel's perspective, where it flips. We see two sides of the same event. The game does that with Abby, where the first time when Joel dies, we obviously see it from Ellie's perspective, but then after this little backstory with Abby, it cuts to when she kills Joel, and now we're seeing it from her perspective, Abby, and that was a really cool moment in the game. And then we cut to her day one, but in the show, it cuts and then it's her day one right away. And I see what they were going for with the transition to Abby's story, where they tried to make it the same way in the game, where we're like, oh shit, what the fuck? And then we're playing as Abby, and then we see why for the first time. This is when we find out in the game why she killed Joe, because we see that he killed her dad. The show tells us, it doesn't show us, it tells us, she tells Joe, which she didn't in the game, that he killed her dad. And Ellie finds out from Nora, even though we don't hear that or see that in the show. But she knows. And I well, first of all, the cut in the show, we hear a gunshot. Like the screen goes black, and then I think we hear a gunshot. So we don't know exactly what happened, but it's just like I don't know. It just felt like a bad fucking novella to me, the way that they cut it. And because I know what happens in the game, my assumption about what happened in that moment in the show is that that gunshot is not from Abby's gun. It's from Tommy shooting at Abby. So like Ellie's fine. That's my assumption. I mean, you never know. They could change stuff. Um, but then cutting to the day one Seattle thing, I just didn't think it really worked very well in the show. And the reason they did that in the game made sense, because we think that this game is this like revenge quest, and we see it from Ellie's perspective, and the intention behind making you play as Abby, where we see her origin now, and we find out why she did it, and then we play through her, is to get in her head, and for us to form some sympathy for her. And we're forced to do that in the game, and like it's part of the design of the game. But in the show, we already know why Abby killed Joe, because she tells us in the very beginning, and we even see in that very first scene. But we don't see it. It's like I said, the show tells us about it. So I feel like it loses its effectiveness, and because we already know, which I think is fine if we know right away in the show. I just think they should have shown us instead of told us. They should have like they didn't need to save Abby's story for next season. I feel like they could have mixed and like cut back and forth between Ellie and Abby right away because we're not playing, like we don't gotta play through it. We just gotta watch. So I don't think doing the story in that same way where we see Ellie's first in season two and then in season three we're gonna see Abby's. It doesn't make sense for us to see it like that in the show. Um, so I just don't think they executed it the right way. Um, I think it would have been better if we got all of Seattle from both Ellie and Abby's side in season two, and they saved Santa Barbara for season three, and they could have expanded on that to make it a full season. And I feel like that would have been a good way to go instead of doing Ellie Seattle, Abby Seattle, and then they're probably still gonna do Santa Barbara as like a season four if they make it that far, which I hope they are able to at least finish the story. If not, hopefully they just put everything in the next season so that they'll ensure that they finish because I don't know what the ratings are gonna be because I know a lot of people didn't like this season as much, like me. But that's my 2 cents about it. I don't know if I have anything else to say for my review. I would just say if you want what I would consider a better way to have done the show, where they do cut back and forth, watch my version of The Last of Us season two, which I used the game footage to make, and probably by the time I'm finished editing this video and I release it, all of the episodes will be out. If not, you'll be able to get caught up and then maybe you'll be able to see it through to the end. But I think I'm gonna leave it there. In the description, I'll leave a list of my favorite episodes or my ranking of the episodes from favorite to least favorite of this season, and then maybe of the whole show. So let me know what your thoughts are. Did you like season two? How did it compare to how you felt about season one? How does it compare to the game if you've played the game? And I just want to know everything. I could talk about The Last of Us for hours. First game I love. It's my favorite story of all time, any medium. So I love these characters in both games. Thank you for watching. I'll catch you next time. Peace.